Tap in Sports. My name's Kamari. Let's go ahead and hop straight into it. So basically, we talking about what's caught our attention this offseason. We know that the Warriors won the NBA Finals. Steph Curry added more fuel to that GOAT argument and tied LeBron with 4 championships. It's all old news. As soon as the NBA offseason, as soon as the series closed out, teams began making moves to shape and strengthen their roster for the upcoming season. Welcome to Tap in Sports. Let's get into what's caught our attention. Now, the first move that caught our attention was John Wall to the Clippers. Now, this was a great pickup for a Clipper team who played a large portion of 2022 without any of their stars. Despite this, the Clippers were still a play-in team, and they were only 6 games out of 8th place. With Norman Powell, Zubac, Reggie Jackson all returning, this team already has solid pieces surrounding Paul George and Kawhi. So if healthy, we may be looking at a top 4 team in the West when all things are said and done. And just to add and put it on your radar, I know you've seen clips of John Wall flying all over the court at Rico Hines and some of those other pickup games. Now, while this is no indication that he's back, it's definitely beginning to look like he's getting close to the level he once was at. So with the Clippers strengthening up in LA, the West is starting to look a little bit stronger. And we already know the Clips are going to be somewhere in the mix. But Minnesota also decided to throw their cards and go all in. And so after Cat signed to that 4-year extension, which was worth $225 million, they immediately followed that up by making the blockbuster trade for Rudy Gobert. So the Jazz were clearly following Portland and Oklahoma City's playbook as they're just trying to get as much draft capital as possible. And the Jazz were able to get 4 first-round picks from Minnesota, and they added Patrick Beverley, who they flipped to L.A. for THT. They added Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, and a few other pieces. And from Minnesota's angle, it kind of looks like they're all in behind this D'Angelo, Anthony Edwards, Cat Gobert grouping. On paper, it's a big team, and they should physically dominate any opponent. But the grouping does seem a little bit strange, to say the least. I'm not willing to say this team is a contender, but they certainly look well on their way to creating something worth watching in Minnesota. Now, I don't know if you've been watching, but the East is also getting real strong, okay? So you got Boston. They traded for Danilo Gallinari, Malcolm Brogdon. Both are great pickups who have been well publicized for that NBA final runner-up, and this is for good reason. At his best, Gallinari was a 4 who could stretch the defense and space the floor. He's a 38% shooter from 3. But unfortunately, as the clips have went around on Twitter and Instagram, he did tear his ACL while he was playing in FIBA competition for his country. So that leaves a hole in Boston. There is an exception that they can apply for where they can trade for another player. So it will be interesting to see what Brad Stevens does to fill that hole. Let's still give him props, though, for the Malcolm Brogdon move, because I do think that may be the best pickup of the offseason if it works out for Boston. Because since Rondo, Boston has put out point guard after point guard with really no success. You look at Terry Rozier, we look at Kyrie Irving, you look at Kemba Walker. It's point guard after point guard with no continuity. Brogdon only played 36 games last season, but he is averaging 20 points a game for the past 2 years, 15 for his career. So I definitely think he'll strengthen Boston up in the backcourt, but let's see what they do in the front court to go ahead and grab another forward. So we're turning our attention to the team that Boston dispatched in the NBA playoffs, and that's the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, a lot of y'all were in the comment section or just in the world generally feeling that the Milwaukee Bucks would have beat the Boston Celtics had Chris Middleton been healthy. It certainly looked that way as Milwaukee did take Boston to 7 games before ultimately falling short. This offseason, they lost Dante DiVincenzo. Bringing in Joe Ingles and retaining Bobby Portis were 2 powerful moves. Bobby Portis is the heart and soul of that team, and I think we saw it in that finals run. And then Joe Ingles is a player who showed in Utah that he can play the 2 and he is willing to step up in a big game. Now, re-signing Wesley Matthews and Serge Ibaka also was 2 great pieces, making this deep team just a little bit deeper, and certainly making them one of the favorites to come out of the East. Our attention isn't leaving the East Coast, though, as Atlanta and Chicago had also caught our attention in early July here in Tapin, with Atlanta making early splashes this summer, grabbing DeJounte Murray and adding Frank Kaminsky to the fold. I think people forget that this Hawks team was only a few games out of the NBA Finals in 2021 before losing to the eventual champion Bucks. And so while they weren't the best team in the conference that year, or even second best, adding an all-star guard like Murray does raise their ceiling. And then on Chicago's part, Chicago started out hot last year. quickly fizzling out after their big three of DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, and Zach LaVine got banged up as the year progressed. Dropping Chicago from what was that number 1 seed all the way down to the 6th seed, where they were quickly sent home in that gentleman's sweep by the Milwaukee Bucks. Despite the disappointing finish, that was the Bulls' first trip back to the playoffs since 2017, and there is plenty of reason to be optimistic in the Windy City. Now, Chicago picked up Goran Dragic and Andre Drummond to strengthen their bench. They re-signed Derrick Jones Jr., and they also drafted Dalen Terry out of Arizona. Once again, these were great moves, and they caught our attention early in July. But then, in August, the Cleveland Cavaliers snagged Donovan Mitchell. Now, while they lost Colin Sexton in a huge haul of draft picks, this takes a Cleveland team who was hanging around that 6th to 10th seed in the conference to a potential 3 to 6 seed in the East. Yes, they're small in the backcourt, but both guards can fill it up, with Garland hovering around 17 a game for his career and Mitchell averaging about 23 for his. With Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell manning your backcourt, Jared Allen clogging up the middle, and a young Evan Mobley, this Cavaliers team may have the potential to be lethal for years to come and a serious threat in the playoffs. So that leaves us with our question marks for the NBA offseason. And we would love to hear what y'all got to think, so you can go ahead and drop it in the comment section. Let us know on IG, let us know on YouTube. But these are our question marks for the offseason. For the Eastern Conference, so Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Ben Simmons are all going to stay together. After all the talk about Kyrie wanting to leave and then him re-signing, all the conversation about Kevin Durant wanting a trade and then him opting out of that and saying that he wants to stay, what are they going to do? How is this Brooklyn Nets team going to look? Because I think on paper, of course, this is one of the best teams in the conference. Anytime you're putting Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on the floor, you're already going to be one of the best teams in the conference. But when you're adding a Ben Simmons to that, depending on at least where they play him at or how they play him, it certainly could be a team that we could see as a dark horse contender. So what are we going to see from Brooklyn this year? Our next Eastern Conference question mark is, what about Miami and what about Philadelphia? So the Tampa Boys were out in full effect for Philadelphia as they were able to get Daniel House and PJ Tucker and reunite them with their old Houston teammate in James Harden. But that kind of left Miami in an awkward spot as they did lose PJ Tucker. They were rumored to be interested in Donovan Mitchell and rumored to be interested in Kyrie Irving. Neither of those came to fruition. So for a team that did fall ultimately short, losing in Game 6 to Boston, we have question marks on what they're going to do to try to improve. They did make that draft pick to get Nikola Jovic, which he has shown promise in the offseason and in the summer league. But we'll see what Miami does to strengthen their roster before the playoffs and before the season comes around. And then for Philadelphia, let's not waste another MVP season from Joel Embiid. That man played tremendous basketball last season, was ultimately robbed of the MVP. Even though I cannot deny the greatness of Jokic, I do feel that Embiid deserved it more. But it was a waste of a season as they were ultimately dispatched early in the postseason. So adding that PJ Tucker, as we already mentioned, Daniel House, as we mentioned, and adding to the core of James Harden, I would love to see them get a shooter or somebody else to spread the floor, as I feel like they just need another guard or another piece to complement that Tyrese Maxey and James Harden backcourt. What additional moves will we get from Philly or Miami is one of the questions that we're left with here in the Eastern Conference. And our final question in the Eastern Conference, the New York Knicks and the Jalen Brunson experiment. So much has been touted about Jalen Brunson's father being signed as a coach and then him being courtside at Jalen Brunson's games. And Stephen A. Smith is on the record as calling it like a college recruitment. Okay. At the end of the day, none of this matters to me. I just want to know how he's going to play, or how are the Knicks going to look this upcoming season. The money has already been paid to R.J. Barrett. The money has been paid to Julius Randle. The money has been paid to Jalen Brunson. All right, these are strong pick-and-roll guards who usually are pretty isolation-heavy, added to a forward in Julius Randle who is also isolation-heavy. While on paper this move didn't look like anything that would raise their ceiling, I am curious to see how it all shakes out for the Knicks now that they have a point guard that they can build around for the future. As we flip to the Western Conference, our question marks are pretty simple, and we have two. Is this how we're going to see Damian Lillard for the rest of his career? We understand that he signed an extension, He chose that he wants to stay in Portland. I give all props to Damian Lillard for not only remaining loyal, but also trying to show that he can win in any situation that he is put into. I think that deserves an ultimate level of respect. So my question marks really go to the Portland brass and the Portland GMs. What moves are you going to make Damian Lillard's situation easier? He can't carry you past the Warriors in a 7-game series. He cannot carry you past LA Clippers in a 7-game series. He's not going to carry you past a Phoenix Suns in a 7-game series because he needs a supporting cast. Re-signing Anthony Simons and Yusuf Nurkic and Drew Eubanks, great. Jeremy Grant, Gary Payton, 2 good additions, very good additions. Payton's now there on that 3-year deal. Jeremy Grant's coming in on his new deal. And Jeremy Grant is somewhat of a borderline star, he went to Detroit and he was looking like he may be a 1 option. But he's proven that he could be a 2 or 3 scoring option. Averaging about 20 points a game, shooting 42% from the floor. He's solid. But is that enough to push the needle and win an NBA Finals? That's the question. And I truthfully don't think the answer is yes, leaving us with, once again, our question. Is Damian Lillard going to be stuck in Portland like this for the rest of his career? Our final question is back in LA, and it's with the King, Anthony Davis, and Russell Westbrook. Now, is Westbrook going to remain in LA is really the biggest question, especially as they got Patrick Beverley on that trade for THT. It looks like the Lakers are kind of content with where their roster is at. But our question is, how is Westbrook going to fit into the new system, especially with Darvin Ham trying to come implement his new pattern and his new regime? Where does Russell Westbrook fit into all of that? That's going to be the question that we're going to have to see play out in the 2023 season. And once again, this is Tapping Sports, and we appreciate y'all tuning in. Make sure to go and hit that subscribe, that like button so we can drop some more content for fans just like y'all. At the end of the day, make sure y'all being safe and living smooth.